I'm just going to go over the steps for exporting, and I'll talk a little bit about the requirements for the Maze project for when you submit. Um, a couple things you'll want to set up before you export the project. So for this project, for the Maze project, we're just going to have one level. And so whatever that one level is, you'll want to set that to be the default level for the project. You can do that sort of automatically. If you hit the build or run project button, this play button here, it's going to ask you to set the default level. And so you can just select the current level. And if you've run the project using that button before, you've probably already done this. So you may have already done this step. So you can just hit select current there, and that'll run the project and it'll set the level to the current level. If you've set it to another level for some reason by mistake, to change that, you can go to project settings and you can go to run. And the main scene is this first scene that's going to run when somebody opens your project. So you can just set that there. If you don't have it set, you can just open your, whichever level you want into this main scene. So that's one thing that you're going to want to make sure that you have set, and we're going to, test that. A couple of other things that you may want to look at, you can change the name of the project here. So that's what will show up, when you export the game. You can add a description, and you can change the icon here as well. You don't have to do those things, but you may want to change those values so that your game has the name that you want to give to it, or whatever. So maybe I'll put Maze Demo here, something like that. And you can add a description if you want, and you can add a version, but we don't really need to do those things. Then another area that you're going to want to check out is the window area. There's a couple settings here that you may want to change from the default. So the default mode is windowed. That means that it opens up in a little window. If you want to set that to full screen, you can do that. You can click full screen here, and that will default the game to open in full screen. So that's an option that you might want. Another option is you can resize the window. I tend to turn that off by default, just so I don't have to think about it. But if you want people to be able to resize the window, you can turn that on. That's pretty much it in terms of the things that we'll want to set here, since we're working in 3D. You might want to turn on high DPI if you want the game to look different on a high density screen. I usually have that off just so it kind of doesn't hurt the performance as much, but you might like the way that looks, and we'll talk more about that type of stuff when we talk about rendering and stuff, but that's another setting that you might want to check out. But those are the basic settings that you'll want to make sure to look at before you export your game. So I'm just going to close this now and save. And when you're ready to export, you can go to Project and go to Export. We're going to want to export for two different platforms. One is Mac and the other is Windows. You can see in the export window, when you go to Add, it gives you a bunch of different options. You can do Android and iOS, Linux, Mac, web, or Windows. We could do this for the web, and it'll run on the web, but the performance is going to be pretty bad since it's a 3D scene. So it's going to be better performance-wise to do Mac and Windows, and this is more typical for 3D games, is that you download an executable application rather than running a game in the web. Running a game in the web might be more typical for a 2D style game. So we're going to want to add both the Mac and the Windows platforms. And some of the computers should already have them downloaded, but if you see this red text, or actually this is a different error. This is something else that we'll go over in a second, but if you haven't downloaded the export package for Mac or Windows, you're gonna see a red error that says that. That's pretty easy to do. There'll be a link in there, but you can also just go to Project and go to Where is it? Or maybe it's under editor. Yeah, manage export templates. You'll have to go here and just download an export template for the project. Most of the computers should already have this on it because we've been using Godot on these computers already. But if you don't have it, you'll have to go there and download it. But it'll have a button to do that. Okay, so then I'm getting an error here. It says cannot export for Universal or ARM64 if blah, 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 blah. And then it tells us where to fix this. So let's go ahead and fix this. So we have to go to project settings, rendering, textures, VRAM compression, import. So I'm going to take a screenshot of this because it's kind of long. So I can have this here to find it. Okay, so we have to go to project settings, textures. So we can filter the settings here. So let's go to textures, VRAM compression, and then import etc2 on. Okay, I don't really know what all of this means. We could look it up, but I'm just going to take their word for it. And then this is going to actually make me restart the engine. So we'll click save and restart. So you might have to do that. But if somebody's done this export process on your copy of Godot on that computer before, then you might be able to skip that step. Okay, so now we still have a couple errors, but we can fix these here. So we can look at the export settings for a moment. So the name here is going to be the name of what the file looks like when you export it. You can change that if you want. We can, leave Mac OS. We want runnable on, and then we want to set the export path. This is where the actual application will go when we export. So usually what I do is I make a builds folder in my project folder. So I'll just create a new folder here and call it builds. And then I'll just save builds here so they're not just floating around in different places. The Mac build is just going to be one file. So we don't really need a separate folder for the Mac build. So I'm just going to click save here, or I have to give it a name. So I'll call this Mac build and click save. And then there's a few things that you can set here. You can change the icon if you want. This one here, the bundle identifier, you have to put something here. This is for basically if you want to sell something in the Apple Store, you have to have a unique identifier. And they give an example here of what these tend to look like. You just have to put some text here. It doesn't really matter if I just put, whoops. I think I hit escape by accident. Okay. If I just put ASDF, it's going to satisfy that requirement. But if you want to add your, game's name or whatever, you can say maze.game or something like that. It doesn't really matter that much. The other thing that you might want to change in here is, where is it? Okay, so you might want to change. I would leave this as the default. But when you have this debug setting on, it's going to export a console program that you can use to debug the game. So this is useful. You wouldn't want to distribute this, so you wouldn't want to publish that on itch.io, but it is useful for when you export it, because if you have errors with the game, you'll be able to see why. Sometimes you have errors that come up in a build that don't come up in Godot. So you'll want to do that at least the first time that you do it to test it. There's a few other settings here that I'm not going to go into in too much detail, but if you have issues with your build, like you get errors, then we would start to look at like the resources or other things like that. Okay, so once we've got all those settings ready, we're going to export. We don't want to export a pack/zip. This is for the pack file is just an assets file. That's not what we want to do. We want to export a project. So when you export a project, it's going to create a DMG. This is just a disk image that most programs that you download for Mac are going to be using. So we're just going to do a DMG file and click save. And then this shouldn't take too long because the scene is not particularly big. And once it's done, we'll see that file show up. Okay, so if we go into builds, we can see the Mac build here. And so this is just one file that you can just distribute on itch.io. And if somebody has a Mac, they can download it. What they're gonna see is they're gonna mount the disk image. So they're gonna get this like folder inside of the disk image. And here's this console version of the project that you can use for debugging. So if I just open the project, it should just run the project by itself. And hopefully this will run. If we have errors, we can demo debugging, but I don't think we should have errors. So yeah, the project should run and you should be able to test it. Make sure to test it at least once before uploading it. A lot of times, you export something and upload it and then people can't use it. So just make sure it runs, it opens, and it doesn't crash. And make sure that you can actually get out of it. So right now my mouse is captured, I can't get out. If you're using the script that we have, you should be able to just hit the tilde key and you'll get your mouse back and you can X out of the window. Or you should also just be able to hit escape. Oh no, we didn't implement that, never mind. So yeah, you'll have to hit the tilde key and then escape, uncapture the mouse and then close the window. We'll add a way to get out of the game later, but for now we're just doing some testing. If your game doesn't run, so if you try to run this build and it doesn't open, what you can do is run this .command file. What this will do is it'll open a little console window along with the game, and you'll be able to see any errors. So if there's any errors preventing the games from running, they'll show up here and they'll probably be red. So you can look at what those errors are. If it makes sense, you can fix it. If it doesn't make sense, we can try to fix it together. So that's the Mac build. Later, when we upload stuff to itch.io, we'll just upload this file. For the Windows build, we are going to end up with 2 files. So we want to go over the difference here. Most of the other stuff is the same. So with our Windows build, we don't really have to do that much. We still have this debug option. We don't have to set a bundle identifier. Pretty much we can just set the export path. For this one, I'm going to create a separate folder because it creates multiple files, and I want to be able to collect those files together. So I'm going to create a separate folder called Windows Build inside of my builds folder. And I'm going to change this name to Windows Build. And it's going to create an exe file, which is a Windows executable file. And it's already done. So, or no, I didn't, never mind, I didn't export. So same thing, I don't want export pack, I want export project. So I'm going to click export and export it. I'm getting a couple warnings. For now, I would ignore any yellow warnings. We don't really care about that. So now we'll have, now you can see there's 3 files for your Windows build. The executable is the file that will run the game on Windows. The pack file actually has all of your assets, so these 2 need to be next to each other. If you just upload the executable file, it will not run. It'll just crash. So you need those files together. The console.exe is the same thing that we just looked at for the Mac, but for the Windows. So if you have errors, you could run the console.exe and you'll be able to see a console with any errors. To upload this, what we want to do is create an archive of the folder so that these 2 files stay together. So to do that on Mac, you just right click and go to compress. On Windows, it's basically the same thing. You right click on the folder and then go to archive. And we're just going to compress to a zip. And this zip is what we'll upload on itch. So those are the 2 files that we need to upload to itch and make it available for people to use. Later in class, we'll go over uploading to itch, but that's pretty straightforward. For now, I just want to take a look at the project requirements before we do some workshop time. So I'm going to go over to Brightspace, and we're going to look at the assignments. So this is our maze project. This is due in a couple of weeks on February 24th. And you can see the rubric here. So 20 points for creativity, 20 points for level design principles. The two things I'm really looking for here with level design are the two things that we talked about last week. Guidance, which is the making it clear to the player what they're supposed to do. That's very simple. It's basically just, presenting the player with a way to navigate through the scene and obvious sort of, decisions to make or directions to go in. So one is guidance. The other one is choice. So offering the player choices. Those can be simple choices like going right or left. It can be more complex choices like choosing a series of platforms versus, a different series of, rooms or challenges or something like that. So those are the two things I'll be looking for in terms of level design principles is guidance and choice. The 3D scene, if it works and it exists, you'll get those points. Player controls, again, if you have the player and it works, you'll get those points. Published on itch, same thing, and exported for Mac and Windows. So those are all the requirements for this project. Just so you're aware of those. If you have questions about any of those, we can discuss before you submit. But I'll stop here and we'll do some workshop time. And if you guys have questions or you want feedback on stuff, I'll take a look. You have okay.